you could just peace out for a little bit and go to lunch off site with some of your colleagues. The lounge food leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah, the doctor's lounge. I mean, sometimes you see the menu, you're like, oh, what do they have today? And then you get excited, you're like, it's gonna be good. It's never good.
It's never good.
It's never good. And then,
Yeah,
I
I
mean, for
know.
me, I get a lot of pharmaceutical reps that come in and bring food, which can be good, but you have to listen to a lot of different things.
Yeah, it's the penance, right? Like when implant reps come in, they want to show you the new shoulder replacement, whatever. Oh, look at this new plate, which is nice because that's kind of how you learn about new stuff in one way, other than conferences. But um, sometimes it's a product that you have no interest in. It's like sometimes reps will bring in stuff that it's like for a foot and ankle company, and like I only do upper
Yeah.
extremity, and I'm just looking at them like,
I feel bad. I mean, there's a lot of reps that I really like, and I enjoyed talking to
yeah,
them, and we
yeah.
have good discussions. But then there's some stuff I know from the beginning I'm not interested in this. This is not something I entertain them, and just because they brought lunch, I'm nice. I don't want to be,
Yeah, you can't be rude, right?
I can't be rude. But it's not. You never have as a physician. You never just have free lunch to yourself. Like either if either I'm talking to a rep or I'm rounding and stopping by the doctor's lounge to like get some food real quick before I head out and get back to clinic, and eating while I'm like just standing and like rushing through it,
You're just
or
scarfing it down.
scarfing it down, or I'm like writing my notes while I eat. There's never not like our
I
some of
know.
our friends who can just like leave for a leisurely lunch for an hour and a half during the workday.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I mean, basically, like for me and you, I mean, we pretty much went through, high school, college, med school, residency, fellowship, and work. Like, I never worked a corporate job, but it's just like, you watch movies, you watch TV. I talk to my wife, who's a financial analyst, all our friends. They're like, yeah, we went on lunch, we went to here. It's like a big social thing to
Yeah,
go out, go off site for lunch,
yeah.
and you get to try new restaurants and stuff. And we're kind of stuck eating like semi-fried or over-fried.
Overfried bland food, cardboard. I did experience that during my MBA program where we would have morning classes and then we would have like a lunch break before our afternoon class, and a bunch of us would get together and go for lunch somewhere every day almost, and
I mean,
go
that sounds
just
great. Like sometimes, like on a clinic day, if we finish the morning on time, like I have a resident with me since it's academic, so I'll take the resident off site every now and then. There's one, it's actually this one gyro place just down the street from the medical center. It's like our go-to if we finish morning clinic on time. And the guy knows me there because we go every so often, and it's like such a treat just to go anywhere that's not the that's not the doctor's lounge in the hospital because not only does the food honestly kind of suck, it's almost always finished.
yeah.
Like they bring the food one time in the day at like 11 a.m., which is not a lunchtime. And as soon as they bring it, the people that are closer to the lounge are not as busy. They flock there, dude.
Mhm.
And you get
Yeah.
there and it's like, I'll eat a little bit of cabbage, I guess. That's the
Yeah,
only thing
cabbage and
left.
then a cold turkey sandwich that's kind of
Yeah,
moist turkey that's
I
been there
know.
for
With the
3 days.
Uncrustables. Did you
Yeah,
have that in your?
no, 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 man. The quality of the food that we eat in this country is just horrible. I mean, the amount of processed. I mean, Doctor's Lounge, right? Lounge should not have ultra processed foods, uh, and
Yeah.
that's a huge deal. I mean, people. I mean, majority of Americans eat processed food, which is very frustrating because that's the most harmful kind of food you can eat. I mean, food that's been packaged and restored and has had a bunch of chemicals added to it. I mean, anytime you go to a grocery store and look at these processed food, it says sugar, wheat, beans, whatever, and then a bunch of ingredients that you don't know what they
Like a
are.
paragraph of stuff you can't even pronounce.
Yeah, ethyl salinic acid, carbohydrate.
Yeah.
I don't know what it says, but I mean, there's just these unknown things. Like, what is that? What is that food? Should I be putting that in my body? I mean, so it is
Yeah, totally. I
concerning.
mean, it's just like, well, sometimes when people ask me, I mean, it's a good question. Like, what is processed food? This is like, it's a term that's thrown around a lot, right? Like processed food, a trans fat, MSG, all this stuff, right? I mean, like you said, processed food is just it's ultra refined or in some way the structure of it has changed to increase the shelf life, allow it to be packaged. It doesn't expire as fast. People buy it, people keep it, all of that stuff. And I think it's interesting if you think about how all of this stuff came about. It's really like a lot of marketing. by the food industry. A lot of it is direct to the consumer marketing for stuff that is not healthy, but the advertising is such that people think it's fine.
Yeah. I mean, we have to differentiate between processed food and ultra processed food, right? Because processed food can be anything, like milk that has been heated up and
Like
filtrated and
pasteurized.
pasteurized. It's processed food, right? But chocolate milk that's been in a carton with a bunch of different preservative added to it, so it can stay on the shelf longer, is processed, ultra processed food. So there's differentiation between those. I mean, now processed food is not necessarily bad. I mean, canned tuna or canned salmon or smoked salmon is processed because this salmon has been smoked and packaged. It's processed, but unless it has a bunch of chemicals and preservatives added, it's not ultra processed. So if it's processed, it can still be okay and healthy. But if it's ultra processed, so that's why I talk to a lot of my patients. Hey, when you go buy some of these foods and go grocery shopping, maybe look at the label sometimes and see, are you able to recognize most of the ingredients? And that sometimes tends to be a good rule. But we know that ultra processed food is cheaper, more accessible, stays good for a while. It doesn't sometimes have to be refrigerated. Packaged meats and sandwich meats that are packaged and preserved and frozen can stay there for a while, and those are highly processed foods and not very good for you, and are seriously linked with cancer and cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, no, that's a good distinction between processed versus the ultra processed. And rule of thumb, if you can't recognize what's in it, maybe you shouldn't eat it. And if something doesn't expire for like 5 years, you probably shouldn't eat it either.
Yeah.
It's not real food.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so much talk and so much chatter around nutrition. I mean, I see all these, social media gurus and bloggers and longevity experts, so-called longevity experts, come in and they say doctors do not get taught about nutrition. Yeah, I mean, I mean, we do get some basics of nutrition in med school, not as in depth. We don't major nutrition. There's many doctors that do major nutrition. They make it their interest. But yeah, maybe doctors do not get as much nutrition counseling, but good doctors go out of their way and read about nutrition, read about diet, educate themselves, because what we do get trained on is we get trained on how to interpret studies. We get trained on how to read papers and have a distinction between what is research. We get taught how to analyze papers, how to do. We have journal clubs where we can dissect papers and figure out what is and what is a lie and what is some company trying to propagate, right? So when people say that, oh yeah, I've done a lot of research, most people, when a layperson or most of the people that you talk to, they say I've done my own research. Most of the time, that means they've Googled and tried to find articles that agree with their worldview, and and then they regurgitate those facts, or they listen to some kind of influencer or a longevity expert, and then they go on and talk about nutrition. Oh no, this is a keto diet, or I need to do Atkins diet, or do you know these are pro-inflammatory foods and this is what you should not be eating? Oh, you should not be eating fruits because the fruits have so much sugar. Some
Right.
influencer said that, and now they're
Yeah, it's difficult, right? Like, I do think I applaud it in a way, though, right? Like that shows that that person, and I think society at large is getting more and more interested in this, but that person is interested, whether they're reading, the so-called right source, wrong source. Nutrition is still challenging. And I think that's why so many of these diets exist. Like you mentioned, the keto diet, Atkins. I mean, there's so many, right? People intermittent fast, the Mediterranean diet and stuff. But all of these things exist and they kind of go in phase, out of phase based on what people are doing. I mean, people want, sometimes their goal is to lose weight. Sometimes their goal is just maintain. Sometimes their goal is to build muscle, heart health, all this stuff. And so I don't think necessarily there's like a right or wrong nutrition,
yeah.
right? It's very dependent on the person's goals, what their general health is. Um, and then what's the data? I mean, the data on nutrition, some stuff has a lot of data, right? Like we can even talk about keto. I think that's an interesting thing to maybe dispel a few myths and really go into a little detail on keto, because it's a very common thing that my patients ask me about. When we talk about like musculoskeletal health and fitness and building muscle, maintaining bone mass, patients ask all the time, like, what do you think about the keto diet? What is keto? What is ketosis? Like, what is that? Like, sometimes patients will just ask you,
Yeah.
what do you think about that? Like, from the cardiology perspective.
Yeah. Well, keto diet is there's a role for it, right? Uh, Metabolically healthy people with no cardiovascular disease, or people with trying keto diet can be dangerous because recently there was a study. It was called a keto CTA trial, and what that showed was completely metabolically healthy people that did not have diabetes, did not have obesity. They went on a keto diet. Now, this was a small study, 100 patients. And they what they did is they did a CT angiogram of the heart, looking at the plaque. And they put people on keto diet. Their LDLs and ApoB levels climbed. Now, just to kind of put in perspective, keto diet and having keto diet is mainly intake of mostly fat, protein content, and avoiding carbohydrates completely. Now, taking in that amount of animal fat to kind of accomplish your nutritional needs leads to increase in your ApoB levels or your LDL levels significantly. So in the keto CTA trial, they followed these 100 patients. They did a CT angiogram and they checked their LDL and ApoB levels, which rose quite a bit. Now they did a CT at the end of the trial and the beginning of the trial, and they saw that people who were metabolically healthy, no other cardiovascular, no other, they were not obese. They were overall skinny, healthy, no obesity, no diabetes, but had some plaque. The plaque propagated even more, and despite what was their LDL level, this was their what was their ApoB levels, the amount of plaque increased quite a bit on keto diet. So it showed us, and the conclusion a lot of times for most cardiologists are taking is plaque begets more plaque. Plaque. If someone has plaque that we don't know about, and they are on the keto diet, that brings upon more plaque and increases the propagation of plaque buildup in the coronary arteries. And plaque,
So
we
was that a thing in the trial that it was believed that the keto diet itself could have potentiated more plaque development, or they were potentially just unrelated? That if
well,
you already have plaque, the plaque itself is just going to propagate and grow, and the keto diet didn't mitigate that. It didn't
it was
stop.
in the presence of keto diet, and but the amount of your ApoB and LDL levels did not show correlation with the amount of plaque you got. But people who were on these high saturated fat diets sometimes ended up getting more plaque, and there could be many reasons for it, right? We know plaque could be related to inflammation as well. Uh,
Yeah, numerous factors, right? But
numer-
so one thing I think is probably a good idea to talk about is just, I think it's interesting, like the history of this stuff. How did the keto diet come about? I think the keto diet was before any anti-seizure medications existed. It was the only way to treat seizures. You would put patients on a ketogenic diet, meaning you'd really, really restrict, almost eliminate their carbs, and like you mentioned, put them on a very high animal fat-based diet. Because basically, by having a diet like that without carbs, your body can't default to using the easy energy source from carbohydrates breaking down to glucose and then using it. It's forced to now break down the existing fat through the liver. It's called oxidation, and that's why it's called ketosis. You have the breakdown products of fat, it breaks into ketone bodies. They float around, and that's what makes someone who is fasting or hasn't eaten in a long time, their breath has a distinct odor to it because ketones have that smell. But they float around in your body, and those are now used as energy sources. And allegedly, I mean, the mechanism is still not understood, but it worked in seizures because since it's a less readily available energy source, harder to create that hyper excitability throughout the brain, which is what leads to a seizure. And so that's one of the proposed theories why it worked for seizures. But then, fast forward, now seizure medications exist, and that's more of the mainstay. But people then found that the ketogenic diet also can lead to pretty remarkable weight loss.
mhm,
It's not
yeah.
necessarily sustainable because when you go back to normal feeding, normal meaning the baseline diet that most people have, which is heavy in carbs, you're just going to rebound.
Yeah.
And so that's another question, right? Can the ketogenic diet, if you're purely looking to lose weight, right, purely for weight loss, does it work? Yeah, it
Yes.
definitely does
Yeah.
work. But it's not a maintained thing because it's very difficult to maintain that. And a ketogenic diet is hard to do. It has other negative effects also, like musculoskeletal effects. If you're in a chronic state of acidosis, because ketones or keto acids. That's what it's called, ketosis, ketoacidosis. So your body's normal acid base, the relative acidity in the blood, should be at a homeostasis at a level around 7.35, 7.4, right? If you're a little more on the acid side of it, what happens? Something in our body has to try to buffer it. right? Try to make it back to normal. One of the ways it does that is your bone starts breaking down. Your bone leaches out calcium and phosphorus and stuff so that it can buffer it. And the buffering works, but what does it do? Over long term, you lose bone mass. That doesn't happen short term. Short term acidosis environments, it doesn't happen, but long term it does. And you can lose bone mineral density. So
Yeah.
that's another thing to consider.
Yeah, even from a cardiovascular disease point of view, short-term weight loss and diabetes control is very beneficial, and keto can be have a use can be useful there. But long-term keto diet can have a lot of effect on the cardiovascular outcomes because you are developing more plaque buildup in your coronaries, which is what most cardiologists are very concerned about. So I do not recommend keto diet to a lot of my patients. They ask me about it, and I tell them honestly, yes, if you want to quickly lose weight, get in better shape, maybe improve your diabetes and insulin resistance, keto diet has a role, but you have to think long term. Long term maintenance wise, what is the best type of diet out there? And there's resoundingly one answer for that. And there's only one diet that has been shown significant cardiovascular outcome benefit, and that's a Mediterranean style diet, right? I mean, they did the study called the Lion Diet Heart Study, LYON. And they did the study where they put people on the Mediterranean style diet, and we'll talk about what the basic principles of the Mediterranean diet are. And that showed a 50 to 70% reduction in a major cardiovascular events. And that study had to be finished early because the amount of benefits and the reduction in cardiovascular events showed, it was astounding. And
Yeah, I mean that's a huge effect.
yeah,
50 to 60% reduction. I mean that's massive.
yeah. A Mediterranean diet with and it's a known fact that there's areas around the Mediterranean that they have noticed that people live a long time. There's so-called, blue zones or green zones where people live as centenarians. They live into
Yeah.
hundreds and nineties, and the concern was what is the reason why are they living so longer. And when you study the Mediterranean diet, you kind of find out the reasons. And a big part of the Mediterranean diet is omega-3s, omega-3 intake through diet, not through pills, not through supplements, but through diet is a huge role. And a big part of omega-3 is olive oil. Olive oil makes up a big portion of the Mediterranean diet, and the use of olive oil can be very beneficial based on the studies we know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a huge thing, and just to kind of clarify that a bit, Humayun, the Mediterranean diet, it doesn't just mean like you go to your local like Arab Mediterranean restaurant, eat a bunch of gyro, right? Like, what
Yeah,
like what's the
falafel diet.
Mediterranean diet?
You eat
Yeah, yeah.
falafel, just fried falafel balls all day
Right,
long.
right.
No, that's not what it means. Yeah, I'm gonna go to the shawarma, and get a bunch
If
of
only,
plain
dude.
rice. Yeah, no, it does not mean eat Mediterranean food. It doesn't mean eat like food from the Arab countries. It means the Mediterranean principles of diet. So the base of all the Mediterranean diet is, things like berries, fruits, vegetables. It's a very vegetable forward diet. So a large amount of your diet includes uh, tomatoes, cucumbers, blueberries, blackberries, and that makes up the base of the diet, right? The most of your uh, fiber content nutrition should come from berries or fruits or vegetables initially. Now, add on to that, you add on, sources of
Even
carbohydrates.
grains, right? Like
Yeah, so
a
the
lot
next,
of whole grains. Yeah.
so the next phase on that is using grains and things like farro, brown rice, quinoa, um, and couscous. Or there's multiple types of grains that can be used, and then legumes. Legumes are a big part of it. Legumes are beans, lentils, peas. These are very beneficial. And then when they talk about animal fat, or they talk about more like lean proteins, mostly from the poultry or fish, such as salmon. Salmon's a big part of Mediterranean diet, and the Mediterranean diet recommends at least 2 to 3 servings of fish a week. Fish that are high in omega-3s. Some of the fish that are very high on omega-3 are salmon, sardines, mackerel, tuna. Those can be very beneficial. Eating more chicken, more turkey, so that's a component of it. Now they also talk about having a dairy component, a small dairy component, and does not mean drink milk, but they mainly focus on cheeses as well. So that those principles, and you can if you're South Asian, for example, you can still have a Mediterranean diet. You can have a meal of raw vegetables, a salad of cucumbers and tomatoes, brown rice with some lentils and some fish, and that can be a complete balanced Mediterranean style meal, and that can be flavored in any way you want. It doesn't have to have a sumac, but it can be any flavoring. And if you're an Asian, you can have Mediterranean components of the diet and flavor it the way you want it. But
Yeah, and that's an important thing to mention, that it's not about flavor or like a specific type of cuisine. The Mediterranean diet is not a cuisine. It's really just focusing on those types of ratios in your food, primarily fruits and vegetables and whole grains rather than processed grains. And when you eat meat, animal products, it's mainly fish and then poultry and honestly very little red meat. That's kind of the mainstay of it. And like Humayun, like you're saying, I mean, there's so many studies, so much data on the Mediterranean diet.
yeah,
Like the 7 country study, there's so many of them that show resoundingly across numerous countries. I mean, like thousands of patients. I think like that 7 countries, there was like 12,000 patients across many different areas where they were living that showed similar positive effects on cardiovascular health, all-cause mortality.
yeah, no, definitely. I think Mediterranean diet is an easy diet to do as well. I mean, it includes a bunch of variety of things. I mean, you can have bread, you can have pasta, you can have brown rice, you can have fruits, and it's a very balanced diet, and that's why it's shown such a significant reduction in cardiovascular events. And for long term, it's very sustainable. You're not going on these long fasts. You're not eating uh, large amounts of animal fat. You're balancing your diet. It's not a diet of subtraction. You're not eliminating things. It's not an elimination diet. It's a diet that's inclusive of all different types of food nutrients, right? So that's a big component of the Mediterranean diet, and that's why it's easy to maintain. You can do it over a long time. You can make it a lifestyle, and there's many thousands of recipes. I mean, the American Society of Preventive Cardiology came up with their newest guidelines on nutrition, and that's the first time we've had true guidelines on nutrition. And recommendation of Mediterranean diet is a huge part of those guidelines. There's a lot of people that they kind of discard Mediterranean diet, or they say that you know the keto diet is the only way, or the Atkins diet is the only way, the low salt diet is the only way, or some people say the intermittent fasting is the only way. But there's no such thing as only way. But there's only
Yeah,
one
there's
diet.
no only way.
There's no only way, but there's only one diet that's shown true evidence-based outcomes, right? And that's the Mediterranean diet. So as a physician who practices evidence-based medicine, that's the only diet from the cardiovascular outcomes point of view. That's what I can recommend for most of my patients.
Yeah, no, well said for sure. I mean, and like the Atkins, that we've said the Atkins diet a couple times. It's a common thing that most people have heard of. The Atkins diet is in a way it's kind of like the keto diet, it's just a little less strict. The keto diet, a true keto diet is actually done. I mean, you got to calculate it out for that patient, their body, everything. It's a very regimented and exact ratio of stuff. The Atkins diet is kind of more loose. Basically, just eat a lot less carbs and sugar. Not as strict as the keto diet itself, but even that, I mean, that is hard to maintain. Trying to really eliminate carbs all the time is a very difficult diet. It takes a lot of planning, and you can be pretty low of energy. I mean, and it's not right for everybody. If you're not otherwise healthy and young, and you have some issues, some metabolic disease, diabetes, anything like that, it can actually even be detrimental. I mean, some of these so-called diet fads or these transient selective restrictions of what you can eat, they can actually cause harm in some settings.
Yeah, restrictive diets are never the long-term answer, right? For the short term, you can have the short-term gain, but long term, you need something that will give you a wide variety of nutrients. And instead of having to take supplements and adding vitamin C and calcium and all these different extra supplements, omega 3s through fish oil. I mean, having a balanced diet that can provide all of these nutrients is very important. And if you simply follow the principles of the Mediterranean diet, you'll get majority of your nutrients through that, right? Now, other big misconception is, okay, the sugar. Sugar is not all sugars are the same, right? I mean, complex carbohydrates are different than simple processed carbohydrates. Just because a bowl of grapes has the same amount of calories or sugar as a Hershey's chocolate doesn't mean you choose the Hershey chocolate or the grapes. Grapes are definitely better just because the amount of fiber content in them, and fiber has a huge play in reducing your glycemic index and your cholesterol, right, and your ApoB and LDL
Totally,
levels.
totally, and so that's another. You know, these are there's so many buzzwords, right? These hot button words, a glycemic index. So, like, what is a glycemic index? What does that mean? Using that example, right? Like a chocolate bar and some fruit. Let's say they both have 250 calories. Which one are you going to eat for a snack? Is 1 calorie 1 calorie? Is a calorie across the board? And that's where glycemic index comes in. It basically looks at if you eat two different things, how rapidly does it raise your blood glucose? With 100 being like horrible and zero being the best thing, right? And so the higher a food item's glycemic index is, basically kind of well, like what you were saying, Humayun, the more basic and simple sugars, meaning carbs, are present in that food, meaning it can be more rapidly digested and absorbed and converted immediately into glucose in your body, therefore raising your blood sugar much faster.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's got a low glycemic index, meaning it's more complex carbs, it takes longer to break down. It's harder to break down. So it's a slower and steadier rise in your blood glucose after you eat rather than a sudden spike. And those sudden spikes are what's really detrimental. Whereas those steady, sustained rises in your blood glucose, as satiety sets in, the glucose level slowly goes up. It's better. It's more sustainable. You're going to eat less often, and you're going to get less of those glucose spikes. It messes with insulin a lot less. So that's what glycemic index is, and that's exactly why grapes are better than a chocolate bar.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you have a spike in your blood sugars, I mean, you have a bolus of insulin that's produced to counteract that amount of glucose rise, right? And insulin, as we know, builds fat. Insulin is the direct cause of adipose tissue production in the body. So people who use a lot of insulin tend to tend to gain weight and tend to gain fat as well. So insulin glucose spikes with insulin production can also lead to increase in weight. And that's why you see a lot of people who eat these simple carbohydrates tend to gain a lot of fat and adipose tissue as well. But you cannot say generally that sugars are just bad for you. Yeah, what type of sugars? Now, if you're drinking alcohol, that is also sugars, and sugars are definitely bad for you then, because the amount of poisonous uh, chemicals in an alcoholic drink, along with the amount of sugar that it has much more damaging than the amount of sugar you're taking in from a sweet potato, right? So not all sugars or all carbohydrates are equal, and some with high fiber content, low glycemic index are much more better and preferred than some of the other ones, like a chocolate bar.
For sure. And I mean, like, no human would be alive today without sugar. It is the basic energy molecule in our body. So to think sugar is the enemy is not necessarily true. It's you just don't need to add excess sugar. But we get sugar from everything. I mean, everything, even protein, ultimately breaks down and becomes in some way glucose, which
Yeah.
gets broken down in our cells and used for energy. That's, even like, and not all foods are like a grape is not always the exact same, right? Like foods change over like ripening. Like a banana that is green, less ripe, it has a different glycemic index. It has actually real different carbohydrate molecules in it.
Yeah.
And as it ripens, as that green banana turns yellow, it starts smelling better, tasting better, getting softer. It's actually, in a way, you can think about it as it's breaking down those complex sugar molecules like amylopectin, all that stuff, are breaking down into more of the traditional saccharides that are found in fruit. And so it does change. It becomes even, more simple carbs. It doesn't mean you should only eat green bananas, but it's just another way to think about it and understand that process.
Yeah, the other thing to think about with that, exactly like you said, now a lot of people in the past have thought that juicing is very healthy, right? And juicing was a health
You talking
trend.
about juicing like roids?
No, yeah,
No,
no, no,
just
just like what we've been doing, like, as you can tell from our muscles.
kidding. Yeah.
No, but juicing fruits. Juicy
Just
fruits.
couldn't help it.
I mean, there was a trend, right? People were getting juicers, and they were just, making juices from different fruits and drinking those. And they
Yeah,
would say,
like
"I'm going on a
everybody had a ninja blender.
yeah, I'm going on a juice cleanse." But juice is where you squeeze all the juice out of the fibrous fruit and just drink the juice. That's not as good, and that's exactly what you're not supposed to do, because you're taking in the sugary aspect of the fruit and drinking that instead of, and leaving out all the fibrous content that's very important. Now, on the other hand, smoothies are could be much more beneficial because you're leaving the fiber in and you're blending in the fiber content within that smoothie and drinking that. Now, eating and chewing on food that has a component of satiety where it fills you up faster. So definitely that's much better than the smoothie where you're just intaking all that fibrous and sugar intake without having to chew it. But smoothies would be better because of the fiber content versus juicing, where juicing is just the sugars that you're extracting from the fruit and drinking that, right? So it depends. I mean, if you're drinking celery juice, I don't know what to say about that. But yeah, juicing
There's
oranges and
nothing to say. God,
apples.
God bless your soul.
Yeah, like those green shots the Jamba Juice used to have. I don't know how healthy they were, but I can say that a lot of juices that are just extracted out of from the fruit and the fiber content left behind are not healthy. And they do increase your sugars and your blood glucose pretty significantly. Or leaving out the fibrous content from the food is not a good idea.
Totally, totally, totally. Another interesting question, kind of like jumping topics a little bit, is like white bread versus wheat bread, right? Like that's such a common thing. I mean, like, is white bread actually worse than wheat bread or not? I mean, I remember growing up, there's less information about it, and like we ate white bread all the time until like my mom one day read some magazine or something that was like, hey, white bread's like really bad for you, it is highly processed, this and that. And I mean, pretty much in our household we only ate wheat bread after that. And you're little kids, you're like, oh man, this isn't as good, it's like
Yeah,
harder, it's like coarse, whatever. I want my PB&J on white
yeah,
bread. Where's that Mrs. Baird's bakery?
yeah.
But that's an interesting one to talk about too, because it's not just bread that's white and wheat. I mean, it's like you were talking about earlier, like white rice, brown rice, different types of pastas, all this stuff. Like, how refined is it? Um, and that's something I didn't really know either until I actually started researching it a little bit. Like, I was like, I actually don't really know much about the real difference between white and wheat bread.
And it's hard to say, right? But the principle is that white bread or white pasta or white rice tends to be more simple carbohydrates and tend to have more higher glycemic index compared to brown rice. Now, until we do randomized controlled trials and head-to-head comparisons and see which one's better than the other, but in general, which one's better, we can't really give the answer truly what it is. But in general, something that's a little bit more complex, harder to break down into sugar within your body or glucose within your body tends to be better for you, and that's why I think people lean more towards the wheat bread. Wheat bread tends to be considered healthier compared to white bread. But in my opinion, if you're making white bread from flour at home, where you're putting in, the flour, the egg, and everything that's going into the ingredient, making white bread at home, compared to buying a processed white bread from the grocery store, the one you made at home with knowing what ingredients are going in there is much better than the one you bought from the grocery store.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, it really just depends on what's in the flour, right? Like that. So I found this out recently that, there's wheat bread and white bread, and it's all wheat. White bread is also wheat because all bread just comes from the wheat plant, all the different types of wheat. But if it's whole wheat, that's really what is healthier, because whole wheat, as the name implies, you take the whole piece of wheat, the kernel, the germ, the whole thing,
Yeah.
and you use that, you grind that, you morselize it, whatever, and you use that to create the flour, rather than discarding the germ and the bran and then just having the flour part of it, which is what white bread is.
Yeah.
So you discard the coarser, harder stuff, the healthier stuff, when you make white bread, and then obviously it's bleached. That's
Yeah.
how it becomes white.
Yeah.
It doesn't just become white. But that, keeping like the germ and the bran portion of it in whole wheat is really what adds the health benefits to it. That's what adds the different texture to it. It's almost more of like a nuttier taste rather
Yeah.
than kind of a smooth, airy taste, which you have in white bread, because it's just denser. And that's why white bread is so soft because without the germ portion and the bran portion, it's all fluffy and smooth. It actually captures more CO2 during like the rising process. That's why it's so like squishy
Fluffy.
when the bread leavens. So that's like the main difference, and that's the same thing we were talking about with like in the Mediterranean diet, not processed foods, these whole grains. That's what makes the Mediterranean diet healthy. And even if you're not following that, even if you're just having a random PBJ sitting at home, buy whole wheat rather than white bread.
Yeah.
It's just healthier.
Yeah, I don't think I even remember the taste of white bread anymore. You know,
Yeah, it's been
but
so long.
recently Maria made some white bread at home. She baked it from scratch, and
Cool.
that was
Okay.
delicious. So we ate that, but we don't have or buy white bread. And sometimes I go over somewhere and I see white bread. And this is different. I mean, I've stopped enjoying white bread now because I've gotten so used to the
Right,
wheat
right.
bread. But I tend to eat more wheat bread. We tend, I try to follow for the most part now, the principles of the Mediterranean diet, and which is I've found it to be not be very hard from my point of view.
Yeah.
But I think the key is, and the other important thing is, which is hard for a lot of people to do, is trying to cook your food as much as possible, right? We now it's become so easy in our daily lives. We're busy. We come home, we're tired, and then just ordering out really.
Just hit up DoorDash or something. Yeah.
Yeah, just hitting up DoorDash and getting the food delivered to your door, opening the package, eating it. No groceries, no mess. But there's a few benefits of cooking. There's tons of benefits from
Oh my gosh,
cooking
so
your own
many. Yeah.
food. First is knowing what ingredients you're putting in your food and what kind of things you're adding and the spices you're putting. It's more rewarding because when you make it yourself, when you eat it as a family, it just gives you a better reward and a better relationship with food. And then when your kids see you cutting vegetables, fruits, making salads, they build those habits and they learn that food is a very important part of our life. I mean, human beings pretty much do everything for food. We work because we need food. Food is a source of energy, and having a good, healthy relationship with food is very important. And cooking at home plays a huge role in that. I mean, teaching your kids from early age, these are vegetables, and these help you. Increase improve your, like we sometimes joke with Aslan, hey, this will help you do poo poo better because this is gonna be it's going to help with increase the fiber content. Or you can talk about, okay, this is protein, this is muscle, you build muscle with that. Or we talk about, oh, let's eat this rice or pasta, this is energy. So we kind of describe those things with him, and he knows that it's like, oh, I want energy and I want muscle, and he tells us that.
Yeah.
So it kind of is good to use food in terms of what what purpose is providing as well in your daily life, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's a big motivator for kids, for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, it can be a fun process too. I honestly, personally, really don't cook that often. Um, I cook eggs. Like I'll make breakfast for Rayan in the morning sometimes, like on the weekends, or make eggs for myself, like just scrambled eggs and stuff. But I really don't make like meals.
You know,
My culinary repertoire is personally very subpar.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good habit, and I want to. It's a hobby of mine as well, and I enjoy cooking. I just don't get enough time to do it. But I do want,
Yeah.
to raise my kids having a good relationship with food and being able to cook it and knowing what they're eating. Now, one thing I kind of wanted to talk about, you mentioned eggs a little bit, and that's a big topic of discussion that comes through where
Dude, I love eggs. I
I
make
love
so many
eggs,
eggs.
right? I
Yeah.
love eggs. Eggs do have a lot of dietary cholesterol. Now, a lot of people ask you, like, is dietary cholesterol bad? Are you able to, shrimp has a lot of dietary cholesterol, or nuts, cashews have a lot of
Yeah.
cholesterol.
Red meat. I mean, yeah.
What does that mean? And a lot of the times we found out that dietary cholesterol is not necessarily bad for you. A lot of the foods that you eat that have high amounts of cholesterol, a lot of times the cholesterol itself does not get ingested or absorbed in the gut because the cholesterol particle itself is larger. So only a small amount of cholesterol gets ingested through your gut. So eating eggs is completely fine. It's okay unless you're eating 20 eggs a day or 10 eggs a day. That can increase the amount of cholesterol you're intaking, but 2 to 3 eggs, not horrible. Eating shrimp is not that bad for you. Actually, pretty healthy. Eating nuts and cashews unsalted is pretty healthy, even though it tends to have cholesterol in them per se. But
Yeah, which that's a really interesting thing because, like there's a lot of data on that. What you're saying, like that the correlation of dietary cholesterol with actually your serum cholesterol, it's not at all a direct relationship. It's a very marginal effect, and it's crazy that you would think the opposite, right? Like you would think, okay, if I eat foods with a lot of cholesterol, gosh, my cholesterol is going to go up, but it's not necessarily true. It's cholesterol really like is a marker of your overall health, like your circulation, your health, all the inflammatory stuff that's going on, your glucose relationship. I mean, there's so much overlay with all the other things going on in your body and your metabolism. It's not just eating things with cholesterol.
yeah,
The
so
benefit of eggs, I mean, it's awesome. It's a
I
very
mean that's
complete
it's a
protein.
huge misconception, right? I mean that, oh yeah, people look at the thing, they have, oh, that thing has a lot of cholesterol, I'm not going to eat that. No, I mean that's not true. But yeah, people need to pay a little bit more attention to saturated fats, because saturated fats itself is a huge, has a direct causation with increasing your lipoproteins, LDLs in the body. Trans fats, saturated fats are not very good for you, and that's why even in the Mediterranean diet, things that are high in saturated fats are suggested that you should only consume them rarely, maybe once every 2 weeks or twice a month, and very small amounts of them. So things like beef that has tons of marbling or fat, which is full of saturated fat, is not necessarily very good for you.
But it's delicious, bro.
That's that's the tough part, right? I mean, a good
That is the
burger or
tough part.
steak can be amazing, but I think
Yeah.
in moderation. Like if you tell someone never to eat
Yeah,
steak
yeah.
again, right? Yeah, they're gonna be like, "What is this guy talking? I'm gonna eat a steak." But if you tell them, "Hey, you
Yeah.
can have a steak, maybe have it once every 2 weeks, or once every 2 weeks, or twice a month," then people are like, "Okay, well, I can enjoy my steak a little bit." We've done steak nights. We love our steak,
Yeah.
with extra butter on top.
If you're eating the steak, just get it as delicious as possible.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, but you got to do everything in moderation. And that's why I think people need to be very careful about saturated fats. And, I think there's, as the cardiologist, I'm always worried about cardiovascular disease. And there's nothing else to worry about, I think, in life. Heart, in my opinion, is the most important organ, there is.
Remember, guys, the heart exists to give blood to the bones.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if the heart doesn't exist, then the bones die off. So, we'll to each their own. But what are your some of these? What are some kind of dietary advice that you give to your patients for the most part?
Mainly my patients are not asking me about cardiovascular health or their blood glucose and stuff, right? Like, we're talking on this podcast about a bunch of stuff, and I have a lot of interest in this stuff independently, like, researching it for my own life and just because I think it's interesting. But, when I'm giving professional advice to a patient in my clinic, it's very much orthopedic surgery related. Patients are asking about their bone health. I mean, there's a lot of elderly patients that I see who have osteoporosis, especially ones that have had a fracture, like an osteoporotic fragility fracture, who have fallen and broken their hip from just like falling out of a chair. If you think about that, you're sitting 2.5 feet, 3 feet above the ground, and you fall and you break the hardest bone in your body, your femur. That's ridiculous. I mean, that is a sign that your skeleton is on the cusp of failure. Same thing with like in the wrist, the distal radius. That's a very common fracture that people with osteoporosis have. Same with proximal femur. So there's a lot of stuff like that. So a lot of my advice regarding diet, nutrition, supplementation, things like that, are really geared towards bone health and muscle mass maintenance, because osteopenia and osteoporosis is the loss of bone mass,
Mhm.
which can be very detrimental. I mean, the mortality rates after that are super high. And same thing with patients that have lost muscle mass, sarcopenia, mortality rates are tremendously high. So I'm really focusing a lot on adequate protein intake for these patients, calcium and vitamin D supplementation, having them see an endocrinologist to
Mhm.
do more than just that, do real like bisphosphonate therapy, teriparatide, things like that to build back their bone, and then resistance training, all of these kind of things. I've started talking to patients more and more about creatine. And just because the reality is, a lot of these people that come in and see you, they're like 60, 65, 70 years old. They're not going to be able to enact an adequate regimen nutritionally to get the relevant protein that they need in their
Yeah.
diet. They're just not. It's very difficult to start that at that age, especially if you have not had a lifestyle to do that. So, from my perspective in my clinic with my patients, it's very much focused on that. I really don't talk a lot, and maybe I should. I don't know. My practice is not really like that, where I
Yeah.
talk a lot about general nutrition with patients, and what kind of foods to take and not to
Yeah.
take.
You know,
That's just
in
me.
heart disease, I think diet, as you know, plays a huge role, and dietary counseling is a big part of all cardiology practice, or it should be. I mean, there's a lot of
It should
cardiologists.
be, right? Oh
It
man,
should be.
it
A lot of
should.
people are not doing that because if you're seeing 40 patients a day, you're walking in and you're saying that, oh, your cholesterol is high, you need a heart cath, stress test. You're not talking about their diet, but I think taking time on one of the following follow-up visits to talk about diet is very important, and you have to gear to the patient. For example, if someone has heart failure, we need to talk about the amount of sodium they're intaking, right? I mean, high amounts of sodium intake, salt intake can lead to heart failure exacerbations. Amount of water intake they're doing. So water intake for the most part is good, but if someone has congestive heart failure, they do need to watch their water intake because they can get fluid overloaded pretty easily. Patients who have hypertension or high blood pressure, having diets that are pro-inflammatory or diets that have high amounts of sodium can increase their blood pressure, and not hydrating enough also increases the blood pressure because the kidneys are not getting the amount of hydration that they need, and they end up causing vasoconstriction that causes high blood pressure. So adequate hydration is very important. The amount of sodium intake is very important. But then you also want to talk about the different principles of Mediterranean diet, and patients have tons of questions. I mean, what is a legume? You can come in and say like eat protein, eat legume. Like how much protein do I need to eat? So that those are the kind of things that do need to be discussed, and a lot of patients are not able to even quantify. I mean, what is 2,300 milligrams of protein or whatever? Like how do we even quantify that? So those are the kind of discussions that need to happen in physician offices and primary care offices and cardiology offices and even in orthopedic offices. I mean, a patient goes into a family practice office. If they're not getting that counseling, they hopefully get it from the cardiologist. But if they have a bone fracture and muscle loss, they hopefully are discussing that with the orthopedic surgeon. Unfortunately, in medicine, we've come to a point where we've been so disease focused that we forget to talk about prevention. And prevention
Yeah.
starts with diet and exercise.
It really is something that's just kind of like not really touched on a lot, I think. And there's a lot of data showing that, surveys of patients and of providers, like how much do you spend on like preventive stuff, nutrition, all that. It's really not a lot, not really not at all as much as it should be. In orthopedics, there was this initiative that started quite a couple decades ago called Own the Bone, where, patient comes into you with a fracture. Your job as their orthopedic surgeon is not just bone broke me fix. Okay, here it is. Now their bone is fixed, even though that's what we would like to do, right? The carpentry is the fun part. But it's owning the bone means, why did this patient have a fracture? What led to this?
Yeah.
Was it some balance issue? Do they need some balance training, gait training, all of that kind of stuff, which is real stuff that they need, real physical therapy and guidance and coaching? Was it because they're old and frail and don't have muscular endurance, muscular strength, coordination? Is it because they just have very low bone mass and hence, like what I mentioned earlier, bisphosphonates, all that stuff, getting a proper DEXA scan and monitoring them and seeing? Because those medications have to be really titrated and watched because they have a lot of side effects if you don't watch them. So, like, this initiative was started, it was initially adopted, but like, really, I would say the average orthopedic surgeon has not owned the bone. It's still very much a bone broke me fix mentality. Okay, now go see your primary care and figure out the rest of your osteoporosis, or go see your endocrinologist and figure it out. And I think sadly, because the compensation models are so incentivized in volume, see a patient, see the next patient, see the next patient, and the compensation in general for preventive stuff and having discussions like that with your patients in clinic really are not there. And it's unfortunate because that can prevent a huge second hit. Like we've talked about on this podcast, primary prevention regarding heart disease and cardiac events, and then secondary prevention in a patient who's already had a cardiac event. That same stuff is real and it exists regarding osteoporotic fractures. Primary prevention is stopping a patient who is older, like especially postmenopausal women, from ever having an osteoporotic fracture, because the mortality rate at 1 year is like 20%. I mean, that is a high mortality rate.
Yeah.
And then there's secondary prevention. Someone who's already had an osteoporotic fragility fracture, then having another one. I mean, those patients have an approaching like 50% mortality rate,
Yeah.
which is insane.
And the
It's not
people
that the
who
broken
have
bones
these
dispute,
people who
their
have
whole
these
body.
osteoporotic fracture, they sometimes do not die from the fracture itself. They die from cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, they almost never die from the fracture. It's just their whole body health is so poor from allowing their skeleton to get that fragile. Everything has gotten that fragile. They have no reserves left to manage anything. They almost all, like you're saying, Humayun, they almost all succumb, unfortunately, to some cardiovascular event while they're in the hospital or post-hospital, like inpatient rehab center or skilled nursing facility afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's very important. I wish it was more emphasized, but it's not.
Yeah. And that just proves that heart is the most important organ.
Well said. I like that. I saw you smirk right before you said it. I knew you were up to something.
Yeah. But we can keep talking about this. I mean, but in the end, I think the conclusion is that having a balanced diet is very important. I think following the science and large scale human studies that show benefit in cardiovascular outcomes and longevity is very important. I think one key that I want to keep emphasizing is do not fall for a lot of these longevity experts, so called, that try to sell you their supplements and their peptides for longevity, because in the end, longevity is diet, balanced diet, exercise, and treating the metabolic disease that's ongoing, rather than taking some supplement that may or may not help you. But you know, following a Mediterranean diet, following eating a lot of fish, a lot of seafood, taking high amounts of omega-3 and olive oil almost always helps with cardiovascular disease, and that's the thing that I preach to a lot of my patients.
There you go, man. And every now and then, enjoy that tomahawk steak.
Enjoy the tomahawk steak,
All
definitely.
right, guys. We'll see you next time at Two Docs, One Mic.